I think I'm going to go ahead and start, aware that people might be joining us from here on out, but we've got a lot to cover. So I just want to formally welcome you and good afternoon. My name is Juliana. I'm the events coordinator at Lloyds Bank Foundation. As I mentioned, do feel free to say hello in the chat and let us know where you're from, which is great. We are going to be recording the webinar, which we will be sharing afterwards. So it will be shared on our YouTube channel, it will be shared on our website, so you can always go back and reference that as well. Whatever's mentioned in the chat won't be shown on the recording, so that's why we're welcoming everybody and saying hello, but no one will see the chat in the recording. So this morning I'm joined by the Charity Retail Consultancy. We've got Jayne Cartwright and Vicky Burnett, who are waving to us, lovely. So Jayne Cartwright's the director and Vicky is a senior consultant and Vicky will be managing any questions that come throughout the webinar. And we've got the lovely Sarah Bagley as well, who is a restorative practitioner working in local authority. And I'm sure she'll introduce herself kind of moving forward as well, which is great. So those of you who don't know, the Charity Retail Consultancy help charity shops and other non-profits to develop their local operations, so improving product offer and people and improving their profitability. So the foundation have been working with Charity Retail Consultancy and her team for a number of years, and we kind of continue to work with them, and they offer fantastic one-to-one support to charities that we partner with. So we've had some face-to-face sessions earlier on in the year, and we'd love to say a huge thank you to Jayne, Vicky, and also Sarah for taking the time to deliver this for us today. So without further ado, I think I'm going to hand over to Jayne, who's just going to take us through some slight housekeeping rules.
Yes. Thank you very much, Juliana. So it's great to see so many people here. We're really pleased that you've all joined us. So yes, as Juliana said, just a few little housekeeping notes from me. Firstly, just to say, we're delivering the session through the webinar function of Zoom. So all of your microphones are muted. So it doesn't matter if your dogs bark or you're singing in the background. We can't hear any background noise. And you can only see the presenters and our screens. And mostly that will just be Sarah. If you've got any questions as we go through, as Juliana said, please use the chat function. So as you've all been doing so well already, Vicky will be monitoring those questions, and there will be certain points during the presentation when we will pause, and Vicky will pick up the questions that you've raised, so they won't be forgotten, they'll be picked up at that point. And if you're asking questions, you can either ask them of the panelists or you can ask everybody, so it's up to you which function you choose. And so you can remain anonymous if you choose to. If you've got any technology problems, just state that, and the lovely Juliana will zoom in, excuse the pun, and sort those out for you. We're going to cover a lot of areas, so don't feel that you need to write everything down. You will be sent some resources after the webinar. You'll also be sent or be directed to the webinar itself, because it's being filmed and it will be on the YouTube channel of Lloyds Bank Foundation, and we will also have it on our website afterwards. So we're really excited to be delivering this. We think that the sector activity usually focuses on the professional and the practical aspects of running charity shops, and quite rightly too. But especially because the pandemic has highlighted what it means to be human, we're taking a humans first, professionals second approach to support your plans to reopen your shops. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Sarah, and I'm going to mute myself and disappear for a while. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you, Jayne. Afternoon, everybody. And I'd just like to say thank you for the invitation from Vicky and Jayne, and from yourself, Juliana, to be able to offer and share some of our thoughts around working restoratively and relationally. So the sort of title for this session is Wellbeing Inspires Well-Doing, and exploring ways to support a safe and healthy way out of lockdown for your team. And so that kind of gives us that overview for today's session. But before I kind of launch into sort of a bit more specifically the aims and start sharing some of our thoughts around this area, just to kind of give you a little bit more of a background about myself and also about what we mean by being restorative. So as I've already said, my name's Sarah Bagley. I did used to look like this before lockdown. And I am a restorative lead practitioner working across education, social care and health in the local authority. And what that means is I'm there to support my colleagues, their teams, and the services that they work across. What we focus on is ways of how are we making sure that we are building and maintaining healthy relationships. The better those relationships, the better the communication, the better the outcomes are for the work that we're doing and the way that we're supporting our children and families within our local authority. So I work around all those kind of areas. As I said, sort of education, working in schools, working with social workers, working with health visitors, as well as families. And it's a brilliant job. And when we start talking about restorative approaches, what we're kind of meaning is that active thinking about how we build our relationships. How are we thinking about building them? How are we keeping them healthy? And how do we repair them when things go wrong? So this is just a little bit of a background for you to be understanding about where some of these ideas that I'm going to be sharing with you are coming from. And, you know, restorative practice is relevant to all of us. It supports us to connect with each other as fellow human beings. And it's recognizing that human connection, as sort of Jayne initially mentioned. It's that human first, professional second is definitely that angle that we're going on today. And so it's sort of within that context that we want to kind of start helping you explore ways of thinking about how to support yourself as well as your team on that challenge of moving out of lockdown. And in particular, we're going to be exploring about why relationships and connecting at an individual level is so key, about how, you know, bearing that in mind, okay, so how do we start creating that safe space for some of that connection to start to happen? And then once we've done that connecting and that have created that safe space and done that reconnecting, it's then how can we then use those healthy relationships that we've invested in to start to build and create a shared plan to support a safe and healthy way out of lockdown for you and your team. So, you know, first of all, let's just give ourselves just, you know, it won't be a surprise, but just useful just to kind of focusing on what are we talking about? What is this current COVID challenge that's in place there for you with your charity shops? You know, and it's sort of, you know, I've put it under these sort of three areas of place, purpose and practicalities. So, oops, sorry. This is me pressing the wrong buttons there. So, you know, £300 million I read the other day was the amount of money that you as a sector, charity shop sector, have raised. That's a really vital role, local and national level. And provides, you know, as well as that national level, there's a real social focus for your shops within your communities. And that leads into that purpose, your very values-based motivation to serve, to be there for your community. And the charity that you're raising your money for, and that profit, you know, that's important, that profitability, that's all there. These practical thoughts are all there. And then, you know, the COVID situations added another additional layer of practicality to that. You know, much in the press, particularly within the last week, that influx of donations that you're all expecting. How do you quarantine all those donations? Then also, how are you going to provide the space to sell and retail those things if you're going to have to create space for social distancing, and that challenge around profitability then if you're limiting what's on the shop floor? How many staff have I got to come back, and how can I manage those rotas which will have all been in place before that may now be all affected by this situation? And part of that is, what about those people that maybe you aren't going to be able to welcome back, who were really a valued part of your team, who are shielding? And practically, how is that going to affect your numbers to to be able to run your shop. And then on top of that, when you do get that shop going, what about the PPE? What about the cleaning regimes? There are so many significant things that you need to problem solve at the moment that it's really tempting just to dive straight into that. You doers, you know, that you're there to get going and make those problems. But what we're suggesting here in this session is, whilst that's really important, yeah, you need to get on with that problem solving. There's this idea that I think rings very true to me, and I know when I've shared it with others, you can potentially have this brilliant idea, the best of ideas, but you need the right connections to be able to deliver that. It's a bit like having, you know, the top of the range, most powerful car battery. But if you don't have the right leads connected to the right places in your engine, your car isn't going anywhere. And when we're talking about the right connections with regards to going back and getting your shop up and running, that's going to be about the relationships within your team. And it's about, without that connection, you're going to achieve very little, or definitely not get the full potential that's there within your ideas. And when we talk about connection, I'm using a Brené Brown quote here, which I think really illustrates quite well what we mean by connection on a relational, human to human level. I define connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from that relationship. So we're talking here about that human first and professional second, and recognizing that the health of that relationship, the quality of that relationship can determine the goodwill and focus with which you can develop ideas and problem solve. And that developing of shared values and understanding and trust amongst you also buys you grace. Because things aren't, you're going to make the most amazing plans, but some of those things won't happen. You know, there is no safe certainty about coming out of lockdown. There's a lot of uncertainty about how things are going to go. And so to have that healthy capacity within your relationship, where there's that sense of connecting and understanding where each other's coming from, when those things go wrong, when those challenges are there, they're much easier to resolve because of the health of the relationships and that explicit investment in them. And when we talk about this sort of, we're talking around the areas of empathy and understanding. We talk about closing the empathy gap, where if we kind of, you know, hopefully you're all able to see me on this visual, every time we find something out about each other, we're narrowing the empathy gap between ourselves and another person. And the narrower that empathy gap, the more likely we are to understand each other. It doesn't mean we're not going to misunderstand each other. Think about the people in your life that you're closest to. There'll still be incidences and situations that occur that completely surprise you. However, you can also understand that if the empathy gap between you and another person is really wide, the opportunities for misunderstanding are much more. And it's also recognizing, this is a quote from Stephen Covey, when you show deep empathy towards others, their defensive energy goes down and their positive energy replaces it. And that's when you can get more creative in problem solving. So if you want to invest in that team relationship where you're all collaboratively working towards that same aim, this idea of connecting and developing and sharing empathy with each other is key. And within that, we're also focusing very strongly here on aspects of well-being. Some of you may have seen these 5 areas of well-being identified before. They've been advertised by our NHS as ways of remaining emotionally well. These 5 areas: connect, keep learning, be active, give, and take notice. With the connect one being the one that we're focusing on the most today. And the pandemic has illustrated this for lots of us, actually, the importance of social connection, the importance of going and visiting others in certain places. No matter how much we might be able to connect virtually, it's not quite the same as being physically in the same space as each other. So that importance of relationships and social connecting has been highlighted by this pandemic. And in turn, though, within this situation, it's recognizing that connection, that investment in relationship is about working towards well-being. Again, the more we invest in that relationship, the more in a healthy way, the more enhanced our well-being will be. And another lovely quote here: well-being inspires well-doing. So we want to get the best out of our shops. We want to get the best out of this return coming out of lockdown. It's, whilst those practicalities of how we lay out the shop and everything are very key, it's stopping first and thinking about, right, what relationships are key here for this to really be able to be achieved to its best, to its full capacity. And interestingly, we're going to talk about two relationships here. And for some of you, you might be kind of surprised that actually the first relationship we're going to talk about is the relationship with yourself. Because actually this is the most important relationship you have, because it's the one that influences all your other relationships. So the health of yourself, of how connected you are with you, then also impacts then on your ability to be able to create, build and maintain those healthy relationships with others. But it can be a difficult area. Sometimes we put ourselves on the back burner and we seek to meet the needs of others first and get those jobs done at the expense of looking after ourselves, when ultimately this isn't always the best approach for us to take. That kind of checking in with ourselves is quite key. And particularly at the moment, I really like this lovely image. It's referenced at the bottom there, around this area of thinking about the difficulty of life. We all had challenges in life pre-COVID. We had effortful days when we really had to put in a lot of effort. And now COVID has come in, and actually it's now added that additional layer on. So all those things that maybe previously were easy are now a little bit tricky. Those things that were a bit tricky are now a kind of a struggle. So it's recognizing and being compassionate and kind to ourselves. Actually, at the moment, it is tough. It's hard. But at the same time, you can't pour from that empty cup. You need to be looking after yourself. Well-being leads to well-doing. So how are you looking after yourself? How often are you checking in with yourself? Because some of the things we're going to be talking about later is about how you check in with your staff team and how you make those connections. But first of all, it's to make that connection with yourself. What has happened or is happening for you during lockdown and coming out of it? What thoughts have you had? What feelings have come up, and how have they influenced your thoughts? Who else important to you in your life has been affected, and how has that affected you in turn? And those last ones are quite important. So, okay, those things have all happened to me. What is it that I need to keep myself positive, that I can manage and I can have some control over? What can I do to meet those needs? So we're going to take a little bit of a pause at this point, giving you quite a few thoughts and ideas there. And we're going to come over to Vicky, and she's going to share and see if there's any themes that have come up within the chat that maybe we can respond to now before I move on a little more. So Vicky, is there anything that's come up?
We've had one person saying that they love the empty cup image, and I think that is a really good one. And I think particularly in the voluntary sector, we are very good at looking after everybody else and perhaps not so great at looking after ourselves. So I think if anybody's got any answers to any of the questions that Sarah's just shared on this slide that they'd like to share with us, that's great, and now's a good time to do that. We can just give you a couple of minutes. If not, that's absolutely fine too.
Yeah, we'll just give you a bit of space to kind of process. How are we doing, Vicky? Is there anything coming in, or?
I was just sharing from my thoughts. I think that one of the things that's possibly quite difficult is, certainly something I'm thinking about, is coming out of lockdown. There have been aspects of lockdown that have been actually have felt quite positive for me. I know this is my experience, not everybody else's necessarily, but I think that's one of the things to kind of that might be a difficult thing to talk about, because we know that it's been hard for lots of other people, but you know, there are things that I'll be sorry to lose, like being at home with my partner all the time, things like that. So yeah, and we've had another thing that's just come up saying, when you've got so many staff furloughed, have you got any advice about managing your workload? So obviously somebody who's got lots of extra work because their whole team is on furlough, and obviously that's a huge drain.
Yeah, and I think I mean, I've delivered some aspects of this session to quite a few teams over the last couple of weeks, and you know, that sense of there have been some nice things about this lockdown that I've liked, that I don't want to let go of. It is a really, really common one, as well as recognising those challenges of living and working in the same space, perhaps also with additional roles of homeschooling, as well as maybe, you know, taking care of relatives by doing their shopping, you know, and, you know, I've also, you know, there's been a sort of a theme for some people sort of recognising initially, oh, this might mean, you know, this lockdown might mean I can get to do those jobs that I've always put on the back burner. And then, you know, like that attendee is recognised there, you know, all of a sudden this additional very COVID specific work comes in, and in fact you then find out you're doing more than you were doing before. If that's possible.
Absolutely. We'll come out a couple more questions as well. I'll just read these out. Perhaps it is the slower pace of life we have been used to that will now need to crank up again to get back into work mode again. How will we cope, I wonder? And someone else has said, I think many of our volunteers will not want to return to working in our shop. Most of our volunteers are over 70. And then somebody else has said, I think it has made me realise that I can and I have juggled lots more than I imagined from a work perspective.
Yeah.
Coped with working from home well, but some of my immediate team have struggled. It's also made me truly value people close to me and how the team may feel coming back.
Lovely. Oh, thank you. There's some really heartfelt sharing there, and it is, I do think the pandemic, quite interestingly, has kind of raised some very core experiences, you know, and connections with what it means to be a social creature, those people that are important to us, and how we respond, as well as, you know, what's important to us about our job as well, and those challenges, and how hard it can be for not to sometimes feel overwhelmed by some of that. So are we okay to move on, Vicky? Shall I move on? And we've got more pauses later on. And I think, you know, I'm coming back to Brené Brown again here. It's important that whatever we're feeling and thinking, it's completely okay. That's acceptable. You know, what we don't need in the midst of this struggle is the shame for being human. And, you know, the whole of 2020 actually has provided us with lots of events that have really brought that to a core, what it means to be human, and how we respond, and what to learn from these challenges and situations. And one of those things, you know, within this situation is recognizing that importance of self-care. You know, those practical thoughts are coming up in your head around how you might resolve that furlough situation or that staffing situation. And yes, we do need to attend to those, but remember, you know, well-being leads to well-doing, checking in with yourself, and thinking about, you know, where am I? What types of self-care am I putting in place? You know, am I sleeping well? How am I with my exercises and managing, you know, managing to go out, connecting with nature, those kinds of things, you know. And there's lots of resources out there. It's a slide here just to get you to think, you know, and be mindful. You know, for some of us, we might go for that physical kick to support our self-care. It might be the emotional or the social or the spiritual. However it might be, thinking about yourself and your own looking after yourself is key to you being able to then move forward and make the best decisions and problem solve the best you can. Because it's thinking about how are your thoughts and feelings and behaviours affecting yourself. Our thoughts, feelings and behaviours are really tightly connected. You know, one influences the other very much. However, our thoughts are not always facts, and sometimes we can kind of forget that. We can get a bit carried away and lost in our heads. And the more that we can stop and pause and be self-aware and reflective about what we're telling ourselves, it can also then be mindful and help us recognize how we're affecting others as well. When we're faced with challenges and difficult situations, it's thinking about, am I co-escalating this situation? Am I getting drawn in and actually building this situation and adding to the levels of stress and concern? Or am I able to co-regulate this situation? Am I able to come in, take a breath and go, okay, let's regulate ourselves. Let's calm this situation down and get to a point where we can make the best decision making. And what kind of helps here is this idea of thinking about what we're after are those wise mind decisions. Those really well-placed, thought out responses to situations. However, our brains are fantastic problem-solving machines, and what they love to be is super efficient and get sorted as soon as possible. And sometimes we might find that our brain is going in straight in with the emotional mind. Actually, it's your thoughts and feelings that completely take over and control your behaviours. But the thing with these responses is that they often tend to be impulsive, and they tend to lack that full reflection perhaps of the consequences. So that's the time when maybe that situation is, and you do get really angry and you do shout, and even as you're saying those words, you're thinking, I don't know what, these aren't the best words to be saying, but they're coming out anyway. And perhaps the consequences or the outcomes of that is not what you were after, because the emotional kind of took over. Or it could be that actually, even though those emotions will arise, because again, biologically, we are programmed to be affected by things that go on around us. So the feelings will come, but sometimes we might be really good at just shutting those down. No, I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to go straight to this reasonable, factual, rational, intellectual, right, let's just get on with the practicalities of this. Which can be useful, however, is missing that fuller understanding of the situation, particularly when we're talking about working with humans, working with other humans, being human. We are that mixture of emotion as well as that reasonable thinking intellectual mind. And so that wise decision sits in the middle there, where you've got a balance between the reason and the emotional response. And you're recognizing and respecting those feelings whilst responding in a very rational manner. That's where the wise decisions are made. On a biological level, it means that we're in our frontal cortex, where all of our really good thoughts, experience, and knowledge sits. If we're making emotional or reasonable mind decisions, they tend to be back in our limbic, very responsive, without maybe the reflective thinking that's going on there. So it takes time and it takes some skill, but it's recognizing that you need to give yourself that space to stop and think. The better we are at looking after ourselves and our emotional well-being, the better able we'll be to catch ourselves, to give ourselves this space and these moments to go, right, okay, well, things are going on. I'm just going to stop. I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to observe where I'm at, and I'm going to take a purposeful pause to try and get into that wise mind space. And that can be tricky, but the better we are at looking after ourselves, the better we are at being in that wise space to be able to better support and bring and look after our staff team as we go back into our shops. So I think a little pause there, Vicky, just in case anything to follow up on.
Yeah, so this is another moment that if you've got anything that's any questions or any thoughts that you'd like to share around the last few slides of the last areas that Sarah's been talking about, feel free to share them now.
So we've kind of been exploring your relationship with yourself. We're now going to move on to your relationship with your team, but we were just going to stop and see if there's anything in particular. Just give me the nod, Vicky, if you think we can move on.
Yeah, I think okay to carry on. And if you're in the middle of typing, don't worry, we'll come back to it later.
We will do. And I know it can, for some of you, it might be a bit of a shock that we've kind of gone on, you were maybe arriving thinking, right, what am I going to do with my team and how can we do this? But hopefully it is kind of connecting and maybe it's having some space to think about that importance of looking after yourself first. If you then want to go on and be able to look after others, it's that empty cup. We can't keep pouring if we're not filling ourselves back up again and looking after ourselves. So we've kind of done all that exploring about yourself. We're now going to start thinking about, okay, right, you and the team now. How are we going to bring them back? How's this going to look? And one of the key points, first of all, to be really mindful of here is the way that you see it isn't necessarily the way that I see it. And this is a moment to kind of, again, stop and think and be aware of our own judgments and assumptions. And as this kind of little cartoon kind of illustrates there, you know, we may think, obviously, you know, the island is brilliant, but the person on the island thinks the boat is brilliant. You know, that we are, whilst we're all, and I think this analogy actually has been used, we're all in the same storm with regards to COVID. We aren't all in the same boat. And our experiences, whilst there may be some similarities, there could be some very significant differences. And so it's stopping and recognising that it is really important, first of all, to be seeking to understand from other people's points of view before you are then understood. And we use this analogy of a beach ball. Okay, so from your perspective, this beach ball that I'm now holding up is blue and white. And that's a fact. It's blue and white. From your perspective, it's a blue and white beach ball. But actually, I'm going to say that's so wrong. And that's absolutely wrong. That's not how it is at all. This beach ball is yellow and white. And I could, if I was going to the extreme, say that you were lying, because I can't see any blue from my perspective. And you might go, no, you're lying because you can't see any yellow. But actually the truth of this beach ball is this. And unless we stop and seek to understand what each other's view is, we can quickly fall into that misunderstanding that actually you've got it wrong and I've got it right, when actually we both had it right. And so the idea or the importance of unique perspective is it, I think, for you bringing your teams back, quite important that you create that space to go, how's it been for you? And sometimes it can feel a bit of a luxury. I haven't got time to do that. I need to sort all this stock out. But actually missing that opportunity to connect, not investing in that relationship could lead to that empathy gap staying back out here and you not understanding why all of a sudden that person isn't turning up, or that person is not following the instructions you've asked them to do, is finding it hard to come in, they're not on time, or they're not turning up at the times they thought, because you haven't connected with them. Whereas in maybe if you've had a chance to connect with them and close that empathy gap, you might find out that there's an issue there around public transport and they're really finding it hard to come in to work because they always use public transport, but now they're too scared to. So this point, this stopping and seeking to understand somebody else's perspective of a situation is really key. Everyone has their perspective on a given situation and needs an opportunity to express that in order to feel respected and valued and listened to. The beach ball is a really useful way to think about that, but this is another way as well. Just looking at that image, what animal can you see? And an animal will have come up in your head instantly, and often it's not that we all think the same one. Some of us would have thought rabbit and some of us would have thought duck. And actually now that we've seen that, oh God, yeah, no, I can see that duck now, or I can see that rabbit now. But back here, we might have just had our one, it's just a rabbit. It's having the time, it's recognizing the importance to just stop and just check in about that perspective. And also to recognize that those perspectives can be equally valued. And this idea about who is right is slightly more complex than we maybe realize, because actually they both are. So you can see how misunderstandings can occur if we don't take the time to seek and understand each other's perspectives. So this idea of how you're going to bring your team back, what we're suggesting is, how are you going to seek those perspectives? How are you going to find out what those different thoughts and feelings, going back to that comment earlier about, you know, there's an assumption there, perhaps completely, it could be completely bob on assumption that they won't want to come back. However, it's respectful to actually inquire and go, I'm just really curious, what are your thoughts about that? Rather than making the assumption, seeking to respectfully ask that person what their thoughts and feelings are around that situation. So with regards to that, you know, I've gone on about the importance of relationships, making connections. seeking perspectives. Okay, if that's what you're saying, let's give it a go, but how do I do it? What might it actually practically look like? And so we're looking here, we're going to explore first of all, because some of you might want to just do this one-to-one with each member of your team. Some of you might want to do it, bringing the whole team back. So we're just going to explore a couple of our different sort of versions and ideas. And also there'll be opportunities, to pause and just check in with you and see what you're thinking. So it is, again, we're going back to unique perspective. Each of your shops, even if you're in a team of shops, each of those shops will have their own unique context, their own unique connection of employees and volunteers, with their own unique experiences of what COVID has been like. So, it's about thinking, what is the best way for me to connect with each of my team? It might be a letter, email, text, a phone call. It could be a virtual team meeting or a physical team meeting. And the kind of resources and ideas that we're going to share with you, hopefully can be flexible across all of those, giving you some key questions and some language to think about with regards to bringing people back. So first of all, it's remembering when you're making those first connections, or I'm sure you've been in contact since, but when you're making those connections around the planning, it's that human first connection before the professional. So rather than diving in perhaps with what are your thoughts about your rota, or what are your thoughts about how we're going to sort out the stock, it's, well, how have things been for you? What's it been like in lockdown? What kind of thoughts, feelings? How else have other people been affected? How's your family? What do you need, to keep yourself positive? What can we do to kind of help with that? And they don't have to be long conversations, and they can be done collectively. These are just sort of ways of sharing it with you, but it's creating that space to just find out and check in. How have they been? Where are they now? How are they feeling about this situation? But it might be that you want to do this collectively, for those of you who've got larger teams, and it might seem, definitely too big a task to go around and speak to everybody one-to-one. Could be that you want to do this as a whole team, but again, remembering that human first, professional second. Checking in around that affect of COVID-19, whether that's virtual or physical, whether you've got the space to physically bring them back in together in a socially distanced way, or whether you want to use something like Zoom, similar to the way that we are now. And it is allowing for that space for the good and the bad, a bit like Vicky and I were sharing earlier. Again, there's no judgment. It's about, talking and allowing that space to go, some of these things, I did find hard, but I really was reluctant to leave my home and to come out again. The commute is definitely a lot easier, in my perspective. So it's thinking about bringing them back as a whole team. And it might be that you want to use, working in little groups and using a range of questions to reconnect. And again, there's sort of a little sort of array of different ways you might do it there. A time that you felt really connected to yourself and the people around you, what was happening, who was involved, opportunity to share some of those nice things that have happened whilst we've been in lockdown, recognising those connections with family maybe that were shared in the chat earlier. But equally, what's been the hardest thing for you during this time? What's one thing you're going to miss about staying at home? And also, I think for many people, it has been a time of reflection and realizations about yourself. What are you valuing? Maybe sometimes the things that have been taken away are the things that we realize that they are very important. I didn't quite realize how much I valued going into the office until I was told I couldn't go into the office. So it's, helping us explore that. And then also that kind of future thinking, one wish for what happens now that we're back together, what might that look like? And these resources, and if you're interested, and don't be scribbling them all down. We have got, these would be available sort of worksheets with many of the images and the language that we've been using, so that you are able to use them yourselves and fashion and do with them as you like. Or another way of just before we stop for the final kind of reflection, for another quick reflection, another way to look at this as a team is that you could use this structure of Maslow's hierarchy of need. Now, some of you may be knowledgeable about this already. Maslow was a big thinker back in the 50s and 60s, and you know, his hierarchy of need theory is one that stayed around for a while. There are its critics, but it stood the test of time. And what Maslow was suggesting was that blue bit at the top of that triangle, being the best that we can be, is reliant on a hierarchy of other needs that sit underneath, with the most important needs being those at the bottom, our biological and safety needs. The fact that we really do need air, food, drink, shelter, warmth and sleep. And if any of those things are disrupted or in danger, we really go into survival mode. So these bottom aspects of Maslow's hierarchy are really key to us feeling safe and secure. Then once those things are there, we can start moving back more into some psychological safety and secureness around love and belonging and our own self-esteem. And then when those things are in place, that's when we're best able to do our best job. And so we'll all, you know, maybe relate to aspects of that. But then with regards to COVID, these questions along the left are there to help you reflect. Okay, during COVID, as an individual, how were you affected by some of these things at the bottom? You know, were you affected by the hoarding? You know, did you, like myself, end up buying baked beans and loo roll, even though I didn't need it, but everybody else was doing it, and so I found it very hard. I didn't go into my wise mind, my emotional mind took over, and those things ended up in my trolley. Equally interesting, I noticed an article in the press today about the impact of COVID on people's sleep patterns. And then, you know, again, all of us, our routines of those safe routines that we've really, you know, whether we like it or not, we might rage against them, provide a level of security for us, that maybe have been there. And then what's it like being with family 24/7? Has it been good or bad? You know, all these things layer up, and this as an image is there to help support that discussion as a team. Do you recognize any of these things? Was this you? And that sharing and listening to each other is a space to connect, to close that empathy gap as a team and go, oh my God, yeah, I felt like that. That's what it's been like for me. But equally, it could also be an opportunity for somebody to share that maybe there's been a bereavement or a loss that maybe people didn't realize. And again, the empathy gap is closed and we understand a bit more about that individual. But then you can also then use this image with a different question at the top. How have we been affected as a team by this situation? You know, back down here at the bottom, in particular around this aspect of furlough, that's very low down. Really key to feeling safe and secure. Have I got a job? And it's provide, you know, where is that space to maybe connect as a team and share those thoughts and create connection and unity and support for the emotion that happens around some of these really challenging aspects that we've been faced with because of COVID and the pandemic and coming out. So again, a range of questions there just to kind of support that group reflection and allow space for that team to listen, feel heard, understand each other, and for you as their manager or their leader to feel heard and understood as a human. You are their manager, but you're a human as well. You'll have been affected. And that can provide and increase that understanding, closing that empathy gap so that you're in a better place as a team to navigate the challenges of coming out of lockdown. And you're better placed to look after yourself and each other's well-being as well. Investing in those relationships. So Vicky, just a small pause, anything?
Yeah, we had a few comments sort of earlier on when we were talking about self-care. Somebody said it's really helpful to think about how others see things. It's easy to bypass that in our rush to work practically, which I think is something that we really recognise. One participant said, I really like the visuals. It really works as a mental image as they were moving through. One person said, this all feels like a lot to think about, but I can see that it's a really important step.
Yeah.
And I think that is, you know, it can feel like, oh, another thing to think about and manage, but in the long term it makes things easier. And then somebody else has said, I don't like being in lockdown because I usually talk to my special needs volunteers and customers all day. I hate being silent.
Yeah, yeah.
Which I can really understand.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's made my heart squeeze a bit. I want something I want to kind of pick up on there, Vicky, is that aspect about seeking unique perspective. And again, it's about coming back to yourself. One of the, for me, and it might connect with others, one of the worst things that really causes me frustration and discomfort is being misunderstood. For somebody not really understanding my point of view, or have taken the time to seek how I felt about something. Oh, I know it must have been really hard for you, and I'm thinking, actually, you've not asked me, and actually it might not have been. And sometimes that assumption, even if you're proved to be found right, that's brilliant, because I know that you really know me. But seek that understanding before being understood. And it is, I know, because our brain likes to be efficient. It likes to go, no, that's what's happened, let's just go. But actually you can end up needing and taking up more time in the long run by creating more misunderstandings than seeking to understand in the first place, and then everybody getting to the same place, all knowing the same thing, if that makes sense.
And something that just what I was thinking, just as you were talking about from a shop team perspective and what's affected you, and I think for a lot of people in terms of the furlough, I think one of the attendees mentioned earlier about all their team has been on furlough the whole time through this, and then they've been working the whole time through this. So just that's a huge difference, and a hugely different experience of lockdown, and people coming at it from really different points of view. So that feels to me like something that closing that empathy gap between you as a team leader and your team is even more important now.
Yeah, that again, in lots of different situations, not necessarily in furlough. So, again, like I'm saying, I've shared this across a range of services and teams in different forms. And that idea of, so whether they've been furloughed or not, it's also those people who've had to shield. So, and that, so part of, again, going to Maslow is quite a useful slide to be on. One of the key or an interesting aspect of being a human is, and where we get some satisfaction from, is that sense of wanting to feel useful or to be purposeful in what we're doing. And actually, for you within the charity retail arena, that sense of purpose and usefulness is really key, isn't it? And this has disrupted that. Whether you've had a choice and without any choice, actually, either you've had to just get on with it and manage it because that's, or you've had to furlough and stop doing something that actually brought you a lot of satisfaction and comfort. And so that tension between people who felt that they've had to carry on, and those people who've not been able to carry on, not through any choice of their own, has created quite that area of tension is really common in lots of different places around the impact of COVID. So that safe space to say, I found this difficult, and not to feel guilty. There's no shame in this. It's just seeking to understand each other and hearing that is important.
Yeah, and we've had a few more comments on the chat. Following the one I read out about somebody saying they don't like being in lockdown because they usually talk to their special needs volunteers and customers all day and they hate being silent. Somebody says, I agree, I really miss our customers and I know they will be missing us.
Yeah.
Another comment is, this is a great opportunity to pause the factual must-do things and think about the team as individuals. I had a migraine this morning trying to juggle so much. I feel much calmer with this perspective, which is really good.
Oh, thank you.
Somebody else has said charity shops aren't just retail premises, they become community hubs, which I completely agree with, and that's absolutely the way that we work at the consultancy. We don't look at it just as a retail transactional place. There is so much more in every charity shop as well. So yeah, some really good points there.
Lovely, thank you. And I think should I move on, Vicky? Yeah. So we kind of covered on that here, and it might seem a bit of an unusual slide, this. But if I was metaphorically to ask Vicky now, what did you have for breakfast? And Vicky was to give me an answer, even though I was only asking Vicky, I bet most of you now listening have all gone and thought about what you had for breakfast. And that kind of highlights the power of language and how tuned in we are to what we hear around us. So that importance of noticing is really key. Whilst some of your members of staff, if you were to use some of these questions and approaches that we've just explored, some of your staff will be really up for it and be comfortable enough to share. But there will be others, I'm sure, who maybe won't. But the fact that the question has been asked, the fact that the discussions have been offered, that fact that you have just noticed them as humans, it very explicitly, not saying that you've been disrespectful to them previously, but that real noticeable stopping and going, I know we're all connected because we're all really invested in this shop and the community and what it offers. But outside of that, or before all of that, we're all humans. And how are you? Really genuinely, how are you? And how has your journey in this storm been? Because it is that space to build trust. So even if people aren't engaging with it, the fact that they've heard, they will be influenced and feel that respect, that kindness, that compassion that is shown through taking an approach like this. But even with all that, and even with all of this investment in the building and maintaining of relationships, that doesn't eliminate conflict. It doesn't eliminate the misunderstandings that naturally happen, because we're all amazingly unique creatures. Whilst we're all commonly biologically the same, made up from hydrogen and carbon and oxygen and, you know, all those molecules, those biological molecules, because we are all, that's why that self-care is really key, because we're made organically. And if we don't, a bit like the plants outside, if you don't give them what they need, if you don't water that plant, it is not going to survive. You are made of the same organic material. If you don't look after yourself, that's not going to work. So, you know, and even if you do all that looking after, sometimes there are still problems that are going to occur. And often when those problems arise, what tends to happen is that behaviour kind of overtakes effective communication. We are going to see, no matter how much of lovely kind of supporting work you do with your team, and then you start to put things into place, moving out of lockdown, rearranging those rotas, organising that floor space, you know, thinking about how you can safely welcome in your community again. You'll put all those plans in. Some of those things won't go right, or other things will happen for those individuals that mean that conflict occurs. Okay, so behaviours, you know, will overtake as communication, will be challenged by something that somebody does. And it's just taking that moment again to stop and think about, it's about how we communicate. The only behaviour we can ever control is our own. So it's coming in, it's stopping, and it's thinking about, what am I saying? You know, how am I saying it? Is that helpful? You know, what am I trying to achieve? Often my own parenting nightmares tend to resurface at points like this. You know, what do you think you're doing? You know, the answer would be throwing my food on the floor, which isn't probably what I was after. You know, I wasn't saying anything very helpful when I say, what do you think you're doing? And it's really stopping and thinking about, are we seeking to understand before being understood when we're faced with those things that challenge us? And that importance of intentionally thinking about the relationship. I want to understand why maybe you're responding in a way that I don't feel is appropriate or fits this situation, or it wasn't what we organised or agreed. I'm just really confused what's going on. You know, and it's stopping and thinking, you know, what might be going on for them? What might they be telling themselves about this situation, and what kind of feelings might be coming up for them? You know, and how might they be being affected by, you know, our plans? Are they've got any unmet needs? You know, what might they be needing right now to manage the situation better? And what can I do or say now that is going to help them? And sometimes that's holding back with the solution, and sometimes just saying, yeah, it's difficult at the moment, isn't it? So it's just taking that space again. We're going back to the wise mind and coming back to you again. And just take a few seconds to go, okay, what's going on for me right now? What am I telling myself about this situation? And so what feelings are coming up as a result? You know, and so back to that, not all thoughts are facts. So again, am I telling myself something that actually I don't really know, is that definitely true or not? And how do I find out? Well, it's by saying, just tell me what's happening for you. You know, how am I affected? What do I need right now to be able to give my best? Is it, okay, I can see we've had a bit of a misunderstanding here. Maybe we just both need to just have a bit of a time to calm down, and we can come back together again and see if we can solve what's happened here. So it's just, you know, providing you with those little sort of places to pause, to think about, how can I better manage this coming out of lockdown with my team, with and the aspirations that we have for our shop, while, you know, in that very most humane, compassionate way. So we're going to finish with just a couple of slides that just really you know, summarize and give you a little bit of a pointer towards what to do next. But before I do that, Vicky, is there any kind of final bits before we do the summary?
Yeah, there's nothing currently extra on the chat, but one of the things that, just as you were going through that slide, that made me think in sort of the terms that I understand, that really made me relate, was I do moving and handling training for people working in charity retail, and this really reminds me of the risk assessment you do before you move something. So, and most of us, I hope, would really do that. So we stop and we think, how big is this? Where am I going with it? How do I just get from here to there safely? And this strikes me as like an emotional version of that. Mm-hmm. And that kind of just really resonated for me. I just thought it might be a helpful analogy to say you know, if it feels like something to, you know, an extra thing to think about, it is like risk assessing our own state of mind and where we're at, and just thinking. So I think for me that kind of really resonated.
Yeah, it's that brilliant. And I think yeah, it's, I mean, I've had several conversations lately about, you know, it's surprising how we often just take for granted that humanness, and we just ignore it. We don't plan for it. We plan for, you know, flood, or, you know, things that are hard. Let's, you know, let's hopefully say, you know, flood risk or lightning strike risks. We still may well be planning, you know, we risk assess for them, but the likelihood of them is really limited. But the likelihood of lots of emotion occurring and fallouts happening and misunderstandings happening as humans within the same team, you know, it is really likely, because we're all different. Yeah. But how often are we stopping and thinking and reflecting and risk assessing and managing those situations to achieve a better outcome? Yeah, so absolutely. We move on, do the last couple of slides. So the last couple of slides are just here to just kind of summarize all the different areas and thoughts that we've given you. And I think, just like Jayne mentioned at the start of this webinar, this is perhaps an area that often isn't covered, this idea of thinking about the emotional human. It's often more on those practicalities and logistics of managing the shop and all the complexities of that situation, and also actually perhaps what we think about are the customers and the community. You know, if we do think about the humans, that's who we think about, and sometimes not always stopping and thinking as explicitly, or it's taking as much time stopping to think about yourself and then your team. Because again, we're back to well-being leads to well-doing. All those amazing plans and ideas that you've got, back to that car battery, the better connected you are with your team, the better that plan is going to be enacted, the better you're going to meet the needs of your community, your customers, your aspirations for fundraising. So, you know, two main areas we're looking at there, maybe invest. So point one, invest in your relationships and explore. Just take that moment to seek to understand, think about the beach ball and what is your team's view. You know, you'll have your view about what's happened, and it's about going around and finding about the rest and everybody hearing the rest, so that we all know how COVID has affected, and be aware of that well-being. So checking in with yourself and your needs, and then checking in with your team, whether that's one-to-one or as a group. You know, and in particular, we wanted to pull a few sort of key points out here. You know, staff who are shielding, that would maybe require specific support. And that could be, you know, we're back to some of those tensions about staff being furloughed and staff who've never been busier. within your team, but also there could be those volunteers or members of staff who are absolutely desperate to come back, but because either they're shielding or because somebody's shielding within their family, that they're not able to do that yet. And it's still thinking, how can we explore, connect with them, and just check in with them, because they're still a very important part of your team. Again, being aware, I know I mentioned it earlier, but it's just sort of thinking about, unless we seek to understand, sometimes we might miss those little things that are actually quite significant to an individual. The fact that they relied on public transport and now that doesn't feel a comfortable way for them to come into work. And also, you know, on a very gentle level, doesn't mean that everybody has to completely open up their hearts and share everything, but that gentle awareness of loss that this pandemic has brought to many individuals and families and communities, and just, you know, making sure that you're aware of that kind of knowledge. And you know, you've got that understanding within your team, then because you've got that connection, you're in a much better place. That empathy gap has closed. You're in a much better place to get together and make that plan for return. And a way you can do that is, well, we've got two kind of different ideas here. You may have your own, but these are just little, you know, techniques that maybe are new to you. An idea of a needs poster. So what you might do is you might have to have literally a big piece of paper with the question, what do we need from ourselves and each other to create a safe and healthy way out of lockdown for our team? And just get people's ideas and start to write them on the poster and unpick those ideas. So we start to get an understanding about what it is that we're all going to do as a team. And then that poster can be, you know, photographs. Everybody has it on their phone. It's up in a shared staff space, and it's there to keep going back to and remember and use to help guide that journey out of lockdown, so that everybody's involved. So it's much more, you know, it's a shared plan. Or it could be that you get together and take a solution focused approach, where you sort of maybe again have 3 posters, or, you know, what are we going to carry on doing that we've done before? What do we need to stop doing? What do we need to start doing? How can we make this manageable? What is it that we all need to help get that change into place? So just ideas, and again, there will be resources to kind of have, in particular, resources around that needs poster, around how to create that with your team. So the last, you know, step is just to leave you with a couple of sort of thoughts. You know, there will be lots of, perhaps, hopefully, it will have kind of triggered quite a few ideas and thoughts in your head. And a good way of starting to really focus it down, what do I do next? It's thinking about who is the best person for me to go and talk to about this next? Who is the best person for me to go, oh, I've just heard about this and this really struck me, and I was thinking about, you know, who are the people who are going to be most open to this approach and this plan? And you know, it could be your senior volunteer, it could be your sorting and pricing team. You know, you'll know again, we're back to that unique perspective, that unique context of your shop and your team. But it's just a really useful way of you thinking about what to do next, because we're aware that we've shared a lot with you. And it could just be that you need to just take that big head of ideas and just go and talk to that one person and go, oh, I don't know, because you won't be able to do all of it. Some of these bits will chime more than others. But hopefully what we have given you is just that additional way of thinking, a different lens to start thinking about that plan of coming out of lockdown, with that very human first and professional second. And in particular, you know, last, before we go to any kind of, if there are any further questions, don't forget to look after yourself. Remember that you can't pour from an empty cup. And it might feel that you can't stop to look after yourself, but that empty cup isn't going anywhere if you don't fill it back up again. So please look after yourselves. Good luck with your planning. But I'll come to you, Vicky. Are there any key points before we bring the webinar to a close?
No, just me, which I shared, which I just love that idea of a poster that everybody can contribute to, whether that's a real poster, a virtual poster or something. And I think it's something then that you can kind of refer back to and can become one of those things that you use in the future as well. So if you've got a big change happening, or you're struggling with your takings, or you need to rethink your strategy or anything like that, it just feels like a really fantastic way to kind of gather everybody's thoughts really publicly. So there's the transparency of it I really like, because it's about saying, you know, everybody's got a right to share, and we want to hear it all, and then we can work through this together. And it is a very sort of public way of saying, you know, we all have something to say, and we all want to hear you. So that was my thoughts on that. But the chat's open there if anybody has any questions for Sarah. We just had one that came up just saying, just incredibly thought-provoking, worthwhile session. So
thank you.
Somebody saying you could write it in a letter too. I think that's the idea of saying.
Lovely.
Yeah, and a couple of thank yous coming through from people as well, which is great.
I mean, there are lots of ideas and resources out there around self-care and looking after yourself. And like we said, we'll have some handouts directly connected to this. But I'm also wondering whether there will be a lot of information on our restorative website that won't perhaps be relevant to shops, because it is very much around the public sector. But you know, I'm wondering whether it is worth putting our link on there. I don't know, Vicky, if you know, we can decide afterwards, because there are further resources on there if people are interested.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, what we're going to do is the consultancy is we're going to put the recording along with all of the resources that Sarah's kindly provided us with, and any links, Sarah, that you think are going to be helpful, we can put that on that page as well. And so that will be available. Somebody's just said, how can I share this with other people who were not able to log on today? Juliana was saying earlier, I think it's going to go onto the Lloyds Bank Foundation YouTube channel as well. And as I say, it's going to be sitting on as part of our lockdown learning as well. So hopefully that answers your question. I wasn't sure if it's going to be emailed to people specifically. I think it's just going to be put up on the website. Here's Juliana to answer our question.
Yes, that's fine. So we will email those who attended with the link to the webinars, and then we can discuss whether or not it's fine to share this presentation. We can kind of look at that and pop it in. If Sarah, that's something you're happy to share, then I'll pop that in the email when I send over the recording. So you'll have all these resources, and you'll have everything that you can link back to and refer to, which hopefully will be helpful to you going forward, and something that you can use as a reflection as well.
And there's a few more comments. I'll just go through all of those as well. So, another one saying, thank you, very thought-provoking. Somebody said it's been really useful to take time out whilst furloughed to think about and make plans for our return to the new normal of charity shop reopening. Thank you. And then, although I came to this looking for practical solutions to reopening, I think the idea of stepping back and taking care of our staff and our own well-being is going to be crucial. Thank you. So that's great. And I would say as well that, you know, obviously the practicalities are still really important as well as, and no, I don't know if whether that participant who is asking is a member of the Charity Retail Association, but obviously they have very kindly made their reopening pack available to non-members as well. So they have an amazing piece of work that they've been doing. I think we've got somebody from the CRA on this session today. They've been doing some amazing work supporting the sector. So if you want practical solutions as well to complement the work that we've done here today, do check out the Charity Retail Association reopening pack as well. I think that, oh, there's some more, just very interesting. Thank yous. I think that's it.
Brilliant.
Great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to Jayne, Sarah and Vicky. It was really interesting, and thank you so much for coming to deliver that this to us today. I think it was quite thought-provoking. We've got a lot out of it. As we mentioned earlier at the start, and Vicky did just say this as well, we have recorded the webinar, so it will go up onto our YouTube channels, the Lloyds Bank Foundation website, and also on the Charity Retail Consultancy website as part of their lockdown learning package. And after this, I'll make sure that all of that information is in the email that we send out to you. So do have a look at the website, and you'll find also a list of some useful resources and also some previous webinars that we've run as well. And we'd love to hear what you thought of the session. So it'd be great if you could fill in a really short feedback survey, which is just 3 questions long, and this will be able to help us in our thinking about what webinars we organise next. So I'm just going to pop the poll up now. If you could hang on for a few and take part in that, that would be really, really helpful. So hopefully I have launched the poll. Normally I would ask you to shake your head if you can see it, or nod your head. So hopefully you can see that.
It's on our screen, yeah, it's there.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
As I say, do pop it in the chat if you can't. But we would really appreciate those being filled out. They are anonymous. So thank you for taking the time to do that. We've got the session until 3:30, which is another 15 minutes. So Charity Retail Consultancy, and Sarah, if you're happy to hang on for a few, we can see if there's any other questions that come through that we'd love to answer. But essentially that is it from us. So thank you so much for your time and staying with us to the end, and hope you have a lovely rest of your week, and the weather does pick up slightly, a bit more wherever you are. And again, a huge thank you for everything that you're doing with your charities to support people during this difficult time. So I can see people doing the poll. That's really helpful. Thank you so much. So we'll just leave that there for a couple of minutes. But if you do have any questions or anything, please feel free to pop them in the chat. And if not, we really hope that you have a lovely weekend. Thank you so much for joining.
And thank you to Juliana for making this happen, and for Lloyds Foundation for getting involved and producing the webinar for us. And obviously a massive thanks to Sarah, because personally I've got so much out of this, and I feel really excited about the opportunities that we've all got to do things differently. I think we're not an Amazon type retail operation. We're very much a human based and a human first approach to retail. So it's all about the experience. It's not just about the transaction. And I think having this time to reflect and really think through how we operate and how we communicate and how we behave, and how we do that with the people who are most key to our operation is really invaluable. So that was really helpful, Sarah, and yeah, huge thanks from Vicky and I.
Oh, well, thank you for the invitation. I've loved it.
Oh, good.
Great.